Hey everyone, it's Lindsay with Your Estate Plan Online and Heirs Legal, and today we're going to talk about the distinction between joint tenancy with right of survivorship and tenants in common, kind of things that you might hear about or when you purchase property. So joint tenancy is when you have typically two people who own or purchased a piece of property, real property, and they own it together. And when the first person, the first joint tenant passes away, it goes to the remainder joint tenant as they get the whole thing at that point. So it's their sole and separate property once the first joint tenant passes away because the survivor, with right of survivorship, gets that full property, okay? Again, that's just kind of passing the buck down the line that remainder joint tenant after the first one passes away now is left with their own property. And if they were to pass away, where's that property going to go? Typically through probate if they don't have anything in place. So that's why it's important or nice to have an estate plan in place with a revocable living trust, because that provides what happens when the two joint tenants pass away, okay? So that's the first one. Tenants in common is a different type of ownership of a property, and that means that property is parceled out in a weird way. So that means that tenant one and tenant two of the tenancy in common own separate interests in that one property. Tenant one owns 50% of that property, tenant two owns 50% of that other property as one. Okay, so they're able to do whatever they want with their half. They can mortgage it, they can sell it, they can transfer it, they can do whatever they want with it, frankly. Okay, so that's the difference between tenancies in common. Okay, typically most people will put that into their own revocable living trust or what have you. So that's the kind of difference between that, and that if that tenant in common were to pass away, so tenant one of the tenancy in common passes away, their heirs would have to probate that section or that half of a property that they own with somebody else. So disadvantages of that, obviously, but people do it as well. So always good to put that into an estate plan as well, because you want to have your heirs to be able to have half of that property and advocate for you and what your wishes are to transfer that or sell it, if you will. So again, two types of property designations or how they're held is joint tenant with right of survivorship. Again, that does avoid probate for the first tenant only, the first joint tenant. But the second joint tenant would have to either have their heirs go through probate or do something with that and put into an estate plan if they were to pass away before that, okay? And then there's tenancy in common, which is two distinct ownership of that property. So if you have questions, you can get a hold of me. I'm Lindsay at Your Estate Plan Online or Heirs Legal. And again, when you think of death, think of me.